How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another fantastic After Effects lesson. Now, in this lesson, I want to talk about the timeline. We've created our composition, so our timeline is active, all right, and we're able to move around the timeline. A couple of things I want to talk about. Number one is here, this time code here that you're seeing when you're moving it, right? It's showing you at the top the time in seconds when you're moving. So let's say if you stop here, from here to here, your length in time will be 3 seconds. Now, what this shows below is the frames. It is important to know that in our industry also, we might not think purely only in terms of time, but also in terms of how many frames we've seen on the screen, right? So in order to showcase 3 seconds at a frame rate of 24 frames per second, we will need 75 images to get there, right? So this is what this is showing you in a nutshell. Now, can you change this? Yes, you can. If you hold Control on your keyboard, you will be able to switch them. So you will be able to see your frames at the top and the time code below, right? So I like to keep mine this way because most of the times when I'm animating, I like to know when I'm jumping from a specific frame to another frame rather than thinking in terms of time from second number 1 to second number 3. But this is very different on your usage and the scenario you're working on. So it's important to know that you can switch by holding Control and left click on your keyboard. Now, what are the other things that are pretty important in the timeline? Let's check them out. But in order to do so, I will need to create, let's say, a couple of solids. So how do you create a solid in After Effects? You Control Y. If you do Control Y, it's going to bring up the dialog for creating a solid. And I'm going to create a solid that's exactly the same resolution as I have my composition set in. And I will create another solid by showing you another way of doing it. And the way to do this is by clicking anywhere on your timeline, and you can say layer new solid, right? And this time around, I want to create a solid that's, let's say, blue, right? Blue solid. Notice one thing, it created a solids folder for me, and it's put the solids right inside of this folder, which is pretty nice and cool. Okay, now what you noticed also is that in your timeline, you got the two solids here in the timeline, put in the timeline directly. So let's have a look at what are the elements that create this timeline as well. Now, in the timeline itself, you will be able to see here and move if you left click the solid. And what is this actually showing you? Well, this is showing you the duration of that solid. So if you left click and drag the edge here, what you will be seeing is the red solid, and as the time goes, it's going to switch exactly here because the blue solid is on top. You will switch to the blue solid, right? So this is the idea, going from one to the other. This is the clip length of the red one, and I can shorten it, right? I can also left click and drag, right? Click and drag, and this way you can see we're going from the red solid and then we jump onto the blue solid, right? If I wanted to extend this, I can also use left clicking on the blue solid, and by clicking Alt and open right bracket, I can extend the clip itself. If I put my current time indicator here and again click Alt close bracket, it is going to shorten the clip. So this is how you manipulate the time of the clip and how long it's being shown on your timeline. Now, let's see another option here that is pretty important. It's the eye here. So if you want this red solid to be shown, the eye will be switched on. If you don't want that red solid to be shown, you can switch it off and it's not going to be shown. So same thing goes for the blue solid, all right? So this is what the option stands for. If one of your clips had audio, this icon will be on. The other icon here that is important to know is the soloing. So for example, if you want to solo just this layer, you click on solo, and then it's not going to show any of the other layers, even if the eye icon was on there. By unclicking, it will show it again. One that is very important is locking. So see, if I click on this lock, I won't be able to select any of my layers here. And this is very cool because this allows you to not select inadvertently any layers that, for example, you've locked and don't want to touch anymore. You can lock your layers like so. Another thing here to notice is that you have an arrow that's opening up a bunch of other options, but this is for another lesson, so let's keep it at that for now. And you will have the option of labeling a certain color, whatever it is that you have here. You have the ordering of your frames, the name of the source. Why the name of the source? Well, because you can, if you left click on this, you will be able to have the source name or the layer name. So you can call this, I don't know, banana, for example. And if you want to know how it's called in the source, the way that you've imported it, you can left click and it's going to revert to how the source file of the name, the way that it was originally called. Another important option here in the timeline is the hide or shy layer, right? So what is the shy layer? Well, if it's enabled or disabled, what's going to happen is that when you click on this icon here, which hides all shy layers or shows them, if it's enabled, it will not show them. If you hide it, if you hide the little whatever, I don't know what to call it, little character here, if it's hidden here and you decide to hide these layers, this is going to hide them. So why is this important? Well, because when you start working and rearrange a bunch of layers here, I'm just going to copy this like this, so to show you, and I have a bunch of layers here, and let's say that these layers are not essential. I'm not going to animate them. I can left click and select them all and say these will be hidden when I start working and animating, and by clicking on this icon, whoop, there you go. They all disappeared. They're still there. They're working, mind you, but they're not being shown in my timeline. And this is really cool because then I can focus on what I want to select and animate, right? So this is what the hide layer is used for. Next to this, you will have the frame blending. So this is a way of interpolating from one frame to the other to have a smoother motion. Here you will be able to also enable or disable motion blur, which tends to slow down your project if it's enabled. So I like to keep it on disable when I start working. And then you will have the graph editor. So in the graph editor, you will be able to further modify your animations, which we'll see in another lesson. So a couple of other things that you will see in your timeline here. You will have this icon that's it's pertaining to the vector layers, where if you select this, it will continually rasterize, which means that when you import a vector layer and scale it up, it will constantly have a nice and neat resolution. Then here you have the quality of the sampling. So if you decide to change this, the sampling will look different in your composition. If you have some effects that are applied on the layer, you will be able to turn them on and off. Same thing for the frame blending, same thing for the motion blur here. And you will also have here the adjustment layer, which is important because this applies to all the composite layers below it. We will see that later on. So if you engage this or not will be very important. And finally, you will have an icon here for the 3D layers. So if you want to make this layer 3D or not, you will have standard blending modes that you can find also in Photoshop. And this we'll talk about also later on. You have the option of preserving the underlying transparency or not. We'll talk about this also later on. And track matte as well. Parenting, so here you will have a pick whip where you can select and parent layers, which means attaching layers together. We'll see that later on. But also you can manually select what you want to parent. Let's say the red solid with another red solid and so on. And so if the layers are parented, they will move together. So this is the idea of what you're having here in your timeline to start with. One final thing that I like to mention, and it's pretty important here in your timeline, is the option of defining where your in and out points are. So if you left click and drag this here, it will adjust where your in point and out point is for the export of your animation, right? So this is pretty important when you're planning to finalize and export your project. Also here at the top, you will be able to left click and drag to see and zoom in some parts of your timeline to better see what is going on. You can do the same down here, or you can use the one on the top here to do so. Whatever works and rocks your boat is fine by me. The most important thing to know is to make sure that you will be able to arrange your timeline in this way. So to wrap it up, this is a quick look at the timeline in After Effects and all the elements that are making up this timeline. Now I'll see you in the next one.